Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Video Gaming News. Today, however, I am not reporting the news. This is the top 10 of Final Fantasy's most memorable moments. At number 10, we discover the truth about Red's father, and that he wasn't a coward after all. And by him staying in the back of this cave to protect the village, he was, in turn, turned to stone. This made the top 10 because it's a very emotional point of Final Fantasy VII. And I know what you're thinking. Aeris dying is a very emotional point of Final Fantasy VII, and you're right. However, this made the top 10 because of its own specific emotional value. At number 9, Palom and Porum sacrifice themselves. Here the walls are closing in. They had just defeated the Water Fiend in the previous scene. And Palom and Porum decide to take it amongst themselves to sacrifice themselves for the greater good so everybody can live. And by doing so, they turn themselves to stone. This made the top 10 because you got really emotionally connected to these characters, and for them to do that, you understand why they did it, but at the same time, you kind of wanted them to stick around. So it was kind of a bummer. At number 8, Odin destroys Clara in Final Fantasy IX. This made the top 10 because you had just visited Clara for the first time, and this is the only time that you can get to Clara and actually wander around, and you see the beauty in this village that's in this giant tree, and Odin comes down and smashes the entire village apart with a spear. This made the top 10 because it was kind of a WTF moment of Final Fantasy IX. At number 7, Rinoa in Space of Final Fantasy VIII. At this point in the game, you were kind of waiting for a cutscene, and they really kicked it into overdrive for this part, going into space, and spoiler alert, getting Ragnarok and going back to the Earth. So this sequence of events and the things that took place out in outer space it was very climactic for that story. And if they hadn't had that in there, I don't think anybody would have given it the reviews that they did. A lot of people give Final Fantasy VIII shit, and I think that Final Fantasy VIII is one of the greatest out of all of them. Here we've got Rinoa dying in space. This kind of lost love type scenario here. Unbeknownst, Squall's coming to get her, and she doesn't know it, but her time alone is precious. You think it's her last moments? This made the top 10 because of the way that it made you feel. It had this hit in your gut that you just takes the air out of you. And she has a blonde moment and forgets, oh, I can press this button for air? I can breathe? I'm still alive? What a buzzkill. At number 6, Blank turned to stone in Final Fantasy IX. This is pretty close to the beginning of the game, and this was one of the first real major cutscenes that took place. And it's another one of those sacrificing himself for the greater good type scenarios. This made the top 10 because you got to play as Blank a little bit, but you always wanted to play as Blank as like one of the main characters, and losing him this early on in the game, you don't really get that option. You never really get to play as Blank as a main character, but he's a cool character. He was cool enough that you wanted him in your party.
You serious?
At number 5, Lightning kicks ass in Final Fantasy XIII. This is basically the opening cutscene of the game. Best part about Final Fantasy XIII were the cutscenes because they made sure that they were incredibly well crafted, and it showed off this chick's ability, and she takes off the cloak and you realize that it really is a chick for the first time, and she just run through the halls and just dominates. That was one of the coolest parts about Final Fantasy XIII. It made the top 10 because it was a very memorable way to start out a game. It was very cinematic and it was very much like a movie. Little did you know that it would be the longest movie in your life. At number 4, Becoming the Warriors of Light from Final Fantasy I. Anybody that's ever played Final Fantasy I knows exactly what I'm talking about, why this deserves to be on the Final Fantasy top 10. This was a point in the game where it's kind of a side quest, and you go out and you get the Rat's Tail and find this island where Bahamut, the king of the dragons, is laying wait for the Warriors of Light, and after you prove yourself to him, he bestows extra abilities on you. This made the top 10 because why the hell not? This would be number 1 on my list if it weren't for a couple more. And at slot number 3, Fighting Ghost Train in Final Fantasy III. I know what you guys are thinking. How the hell did this beat out Lightning kicking ass on a train, or Odin destroying Clara, and all different kinds of stuff? At the time that this game came out, the graphics that were going on for this scene right here, which is kind of funny to look at, were incredible. This was kind of one of those oh shit moments when it came to Final Fantasy, and being the third installment in the US, it really, this scene really shone more than a lot of other stuff that had already come out. There's always some kind of a spooky element in a Final Fantasy game, and this happens to be one of them. Fighting an actual train is a little bit ridiculous. And the cool part about Final Fantasy is that there was a bunch of different ways to play this, and splitting your group apart in Final Fantasy III was awesome. But being a kid looking at this for the first time, you're really blown away. And this made the number 3 spot because it has a special place in my heart. And if I didn't put this next one as slot number 2, you guys would kick my ass. And number 2, Sephiroth kills Aeris, Final Fantasy VII. Everybody knows this scene. It's the most talked about scene of all of Final Fantasy. This made the number 2 slot and not the number 1 slot because a lot has happened in the Final Fantasy series since this. And granted, this was the game that changed all of Final Fantasy for the future installments to come. And Final Fantasy VII is still one of the greatest RPGs that Square Enix has ever put out. Such a climactic thing. You kind of fell in love with Aeris, and then she dies, and it's like, once again, WTF. And in slot number 1, Yuna dancing from Final Fantasy X. This made the number 1 slot because the graphics at this time were gorgeous. They still compete with modern graphics coming out for next gen. This was one of the most climactic points in all of Final Fantasy X, and it happens very early on in the game, but it sets the entire tone of the story. And it's a lot of things that players, you know, get drawn into the story with. And here she's dancing to send the fallen onto the far plane. The reason why this made the number 1 spot is because it's a gorgeous video. It has a lot of emotion in it, and there wasn't a single word that was spoken. In a way, it's a very poetic realization of what happens to all of life, and Square Enix has a way of putting that into a game and making you forget reality for a while, but at the same time it brings you that much closer to it. Well, there you have it, guys. There's the top 10. I'm sorry if I disappointed many of you. These are my personal favorites, and this is Pimshit signing off.